I want this part to be part of the podcast. I don't know, Susan, if this is going to be one of those times, because not that I might have an unpopular opinion about this, but there may be part of me that I can't get out of the way of to not enjoy this movie, because I don't think I think, and you might agree with me on this, a movie like this is almost so important, my enjoyment of it is not important. I think this movie is... in a lot of ways, like you could make the case like it's the musical to end all musicals. And especially for a certain group of people, they probably saw this movie a million times growing up. I was talking to my mother on the phone today, and she was like, I didn't remember that it was 3 hours long. When we watched it on TV growing up, it must have been 5 hours. And I was like, yeah, you're right. It probably, there's like no way it wasn't, unless they were cutting things out, which I don't think they were. I mean, again, the importance of this musical, I think, can't be, stated enough at this point. And again, like, I think that for especially the lead actress, Julie Andrews, it almost kind of becomes of one or two things. It becomes kind of her calling card, obviously. And I think the thing that, like, there's certain iconic imagery in this movie that, again, is like, what is it? It's from this, and it's only from this, and you know what it's from. And other things have parodied it to the point where I had seen a specific parody of one of the scenes in this movie more than I'd ever seen this movie, and I just associate it with that movie, not this movie. But all of that to say,
but what parody? What was that?
It's you're gonna laugh. It's Chevy Chase in National Lampoon's European Vacation, where he's having a dream on the airplane about singing in the hills of Austria. And it's this, like, it's the scene from the beginning of the movie, which I think the thing that cracks me up is, like, the thing that I think everyone at least knows of this movie is the scene of Julie Andrews spinning in the hills and singing. It takes place in the first 10 minutes. Like, that's the thing that, like, cracks me up, because my wife, who had not seen it either, was like, well, just get to that one scene in the movie, watch that and be done. I was like, no, you don't understand. That's like the first 5 minutes of the movie. Like, that's the opening of the movie. The thing that I think the movie is so well known for, at least outside of having just seen the movie, but the iconic imagery of the movie is in the first 5 minutes, which cracked me up. But all of that to say, on this episode of the Culture Cast, I am still your host, Chris Dashew, much to the chagrin of many, and I am joined by my good friend, one of the hosts of 80s TV Ladies over on WeirdingWayMedia.com. She programmed this episode, and I'm sure we're going to have plenty to say. I might wrangle some people here. I'm sorry in advance. But my friend and yours, Susan Lambert-Haddam.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's so exciting to be here on the Julie Andrews train.
I know. It's just like continued. Richard and I did the Americanization of Emily because you and I did Victor Victoria, and we're doing this because we did Victor Victoria. So yeah, it's kind of like, it's just continuing organically this year a little bit. And I'm getting kind of exposed more and more to Julie Andrews. And yeah, this was, this came out of our Victor Victoria talk, right? I believe we talked about.
Because I found out that you had not seen it.
I sure hadn't. But yeah, on this episode of the Culture Cast, we're taking a diversion further into Julie Andrews territory with a look at the film adaptation of a movie that, again, if you've seen the shot of Julie Andrews, you know what we're talking about, but it is the screen adaptation of the stage musical, The Sound of Music.
The wait is over. The happiest sound in all the world is back. The Sound of Music.
How do you solve a problem?
Starring Julie Andrews and featuring 16 of Rodgers and Hammerstein's greatest songs. The wait is over. The Sound of Music is back. Rated G.
So the film is directed by Robert Weiss, based on, like we mentioned, the Sound of Music stage play by Howard Lindsay and Russell Crouse. And the film stars Julie Andrews, Christopher Plummer, and whole bunch of other people. But again, Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer, I think, are the important people to mention. They're going to be the focus of the movie. Eleanor Parker plays the Baroness, and Richard Hayden plays Max Detweiler, a friend of the family. And yeah, It's a movie about Julie Andrews as Maria, who is a nun who sucks at being a nun because she has too much fun to be a nun. It was what it seems like. She's too much of a handful for these women to handle. So they send her away to be the countess of a household and to help the children who have no ability to take care of themselves, I guess, but they do, but they don't, and they force all the other people who have come to take care of them away because they're terrible children, apparently. And all this to say that these children are the children of Christopher Plummer, his 7 children, and his wife has just passed away. And if you see where this is, you can see where this is going from a mile away. Love blossoms between Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer, and yeah, there's a lot to talk about. So Susan, like I mentioned in the lead up to the episode, this was kind of something that came organically out of our conversation. So tell me a little bit about your history with The Sound of Music.
Well, Chris, I was not old enough to be around when Sound of Music, the movie, first came out, or the musical. However, I was old enough to have the Sound of Music movie played on television consistently, right? It's a go-to for any television from the 70s and 80s because playing sort of what those classic movies were big. So I imagine that my first introduction to the Sound of Music was actually on television. I don't know that for sure, but I'm pretty sure. Being one of the movies that they played like maybe every Christmas or maybe every Thanksgiving or maybe, every
I can totally see that. Like, well, like I said with my mom, like she said, like I saw this a bunch. So it's like while watching the movie, I totally understand this being a thing that's just being like played consistently on TV for good reason. And
always was successful. I saw the stage musical done at like a high school level, several times before I saw a professional production done. The stage musical was a little bit different. Had a few different songs, had lesser songs, different songs, and then what is now the stage musical sort of adapted into basically mostly sort of adapted to be the movie musical, and so sort of. Kind of noticing that in various productions where you're like, oh, this is the original and that's the other one. And I actually think that the movie version A is just sort of more iconic and then has become sort of what I would say kind of the grand tradition of what the stage musical is, as far as I can tell. And again, I haven't studied Sound of Music as a musical. I've just seen productions and I've never done it. But I like it. So I have very fond memories of this musical. It was never like, oh my God, my favorite, but it's always one of those ones that for me is a little bit like Jaws, and that if it comes on, I just keep watching it. and here is why for me. It's friggin' beautiful. There's something very stunningly beautiful about how just gorgeous it is. It's so lush. It's so beautifully shot. It's, Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer are beautiful in it. The kids are adorable. Everybody's adorable in it. And it's anti-Nazi. What's not to like? So, and it's based on a true story, right? So there's a book. It's all the stage musical is adapted from a book and 2 like documentaries or 2 films that were made about the Von Trapp family singers. And, Marie Von Trapp was a real person. Now they took a lot of creative license.
No, they could never have. You're telling me that the story is not nearly as exciting as the movie? I mean, it's fun. It's funny though. Like I was doing the research. It's like the story is heavily dramatized. I'm like, oh no shit, it is like for fucking real. Like, yeah. But again, like I will say for me, as someone who had never seen this before, again, had only seen like, and here's the funny thing, like, I guess the other point of reference now for, I guess the most recent pop culture thing would be Ted Lasso. In the 3rd season of Ted Lasso, they're doing the song from they're doing the what's the song called? Again, I've seen this only a handful of times. The Goodbye song. They do that to Ted Lasso when he's exactly.
Yes.
Like they do the soccer team does that for Ted Lasso in the 3rd season of the show. And like, that's a pretty big pop culture reference point to put in your show and expect most people to get, which again, I think most people did get because it comes from this. So that would be, I guess, the most recent thing that I could think of that would be referencing this. But again, I had never seen this, and it's not that I had been avoiding it intentionally. It's more just this movie didn't make a case for me to watch it, other than like, it's a nice looking older movie, but like the music that I had heard is fine, but it's very Rodgers and Hammerstein. Like, I mean, again, like, and that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it as a bad thing. I'm saying just if you watch this movie or a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, you know what you're going to get. You're watching it because it's Rodgers and Hammerstein, because in a lot of ways it's the height of what a certain kind of musical can be, and especially being made at a certain time in Hollywood. Like, this is like the peak of a certain kind of thing. And if you watch this movie, you will understand what I mean. Like, it's musical with a capital M is what this feels like. Like, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to watch. For me, not every musical with a capital M resonates with me. We didn't get a chance to talk about it last month, but I did watch it. I found Les Miserables to be stunningly miserable, no pun intended, as a musical, because like I get the appeal, but for me, that message doesn't resonate with me. And the things that I'm meant to find impressive, technically, I do find impressive, but the story and the message and the music doesn't resonate with me. I couldn't tell you a song from Les Mis that I remember. I couldn't hum a tune from Les Mis. I can hum a tune from this because I think there are parts of this that the music is memorable. But again, I also think some of the music in this is so fucking ubiquitous. It's like, you probably know the song, you may not even know what it's from. Like, Do, Re, Mi, like that. I mean, like, I don't know if you can exist of a certain age and have not heard that. So again, like, I knew the importance of the movie and I understand and appreciate the importance of the movie. But like I said, I may rankle some people with this. Similarly to my opinion on Oliver, this just is not a movie made for me. This is a movie made at a time and a place where this kind of thing was immensely popular and everybody wanted to see it. I think that it's important to know and see and appreciate where musicals were at a certain time and place, especially film adaptations of stage musicals. But this, I mean, like, this is a beautiful musical, but like, for me, there are other musicals that I enjoy more. And this just, for me, in a lot of ways, like, it is exactly what I was expecting in both good and bad ways. Like, it's a 3-hour long movie and it sure feels like it. Like, and that was my concern. Like, one of my concerns was like, is this going to feel like a musical that just goes on for too long? And it does. And like, but again, like, I knew it was going to be, because this is that kind of thing. Like, it's a big, if it weren't a musical, it would be called an epic, right? Like, this is an epic movie. The story is epic. The stakes are epic. And the music, I think, is, again, like, for me, the music is fine. The music is at times the worst and best part of the movie, but at the same time, like, again, like, there's so much else that I can't pretend to sit here and say my opinion on Sound of Music being just okay is going to change the fact that it's an important movie. It just doesn't resonate with me. I appreciate how important of a movie it is. It just doesn't resonate with me. And guess what? That's perfectly fine, because the things that I find to be my favorite musicals probably don't resonate with a lot of people. Otherwise,
what's your favorite musical?
Well, that's the one of my favorite musicals is Repo the Genetic Opera, which I know is not a good musical. Like, I actively understand that it's not, but I enjoy it. I love it. I think it's weird and fun. I mean, I also really love Shock Treatment, another musical, and also probably The Phantom of the Paradise has got to be up there as well. Like, and those are things that are like very odd, but very specific, all kind of the same
genre.
area. Yeah, right. And again, like, I understand that those kinds of musicals aren't going to resonate with a certain kind of people. So that's the thing. I know that the musicals that I like don't exist without the musicals like those. And to be fair, I would even go as far as to say my favorite musicals at this point are probably Indian movies. Because, like, but I mean,
which have a lot
I mean,
Indian movies studied Sound of Music.
well, and that's the thing. Like a lot of Indian cinema is musicals, and they're not even bound by. So that's the thing. This movie is bound by the restrictions of a musical, even if it doesn't want to acknowledge it. Indian cinema
totally
is
acknowledge it.
Well, we're right. Like, I mean, but like Indian cinema, because of what they're doing, they don't have to acknowledge it. It's just part of the movie. You can have an action scene with a musical number sandwiched in between them, like, and nobody thinks that that's a problem. But with American cinema, there's this weird expectation that like we have to compartmentalize a thing and like genre compartmentalization, like can't do this and this in the same movie. A musical can't be a kick-ass action movie. It just has to be like a very nice tale about two people falling in love. And I hate that because again, like, well, because Indian cinema shows that that doesn't have to be the case. But again, like there's a certain rigidness that American cinema and European cinema have that like this falls into, which is like, this is a musical again with a capital M. Not to say it's a bad thing, but if you watch this, you know what you're getting, right? Like, I mean, but like, that's why you're watching it, because it's beautiful.
I'm actually going to disagree with you.
Okay. I'm curious. Go for it. Yeah.
Because again, it's one thing to say, oh yeah, Indian cinema does musicals better. Indian cinema didn't do musicals better in 1965. There weren't like the musical is an American invention, and I'm excited that people took it and take it somewhere else. And I'm excited that the musical has evolved.
Right.
For sure. But that's a little bit like saying, the new Shark movies are way better than Jaws.
Indian musicals are rooted in Indian theater, though. They're not inspired as much by American.
No. I'm not talking about Indian musicals. I'm talking about all movies are somewhat inspired by the 1950s and 60s American cinema, and then the French Wave that came out, and then everything kind of builds on it. But it's like this movie is not this is less of a movie than it is an adaptation of a stage musical that was extremely successful.
Right.
And at the time, musicals were around, and musicals were still working off the assumption that everybody wanted 3 hours of a musical.
Right. Give them everything.
Give them everything. But also because there's not a lot of television, movies are very different. And the musical was the entire evening of entertainment.
Yeah. I mean, that's Indian cinema, the same thing.
Right. It's the same thing. So I can go, Indian cinema is sometimes a little long.
I agree. I 100% agree there.
And I love Indian cinema. The stuff I've seen. I haven't seen a lot. But yes, this is a very old-fashioned musical. This is a very traditional 50s musical.
Right.
Because they were all 50s musicals until probably the 70s, maybe the 60s, late 60s. But, but again, I think there's something, and I have come to really appreciate this movie more than I did when I was probably your age, where I thought it was probably a little bit treacle.
It kind of revels in it, but that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, again, like, that's my conceit here is like, I know that I might be a little too cynical for a movie like this, but at the same time, like, I understand how someone could put this on and be like, this is my thing. And this is like, this makes me feel a certain way that like no other things can. Like, similarly to the way I feel other people probably feel like about The Wizard of Oz. You know what I mean? It's like, this is a thing where it's like,
Oz is definitely
it's a thing.
It's a thing. And it's also a movie that I grew up on because it was a movie that got played over and over and over and over again on television.
When the pool of movies is small that everybody knows, the things that people know are going to be really big. And like you mentioned, like the idea with Indian cinema is you go to the movie and that's an afternoon's worth of entertainment. And that idea what is not lost in American cinema, but like the expectations have become so kind of commoditized and different that it's less about going and seeing one long movie, but 2 long movies now, or 3 long movies. So it's again, the expectations are different, but Indian cinema still feels that same way. Like Indian cinema still has a lot more in common with The Sound of Music than it does with traditional American cinema, because the movies are 3 hours long and they're epics and they're telling a whole story and they're giving everybody who's coming to see it, be it mom, dad, brother or sister, something. Oh, this movie has Nazis, but it also has, Julie Andrews singing, and then it has Christopher Plummer. It's like everything for everybody. And Indian cinema is still doing that. I mean, every time we watch a Bollywood movie, we say something to the effect of, they don't do this anymore. It's because they were doing it here at a certain time and place in cinema, and this is the time. I mean, The Sound of Music is in that conversation. It's the 60s. Like you said, like the 60s are, for I think American cinema, the peak of musicals. Like there have been successes since, but if we're talking like the time and place of the golden age of musicals, it's the 60s in American cinema.
Because it's West Side Story, it's Sound of Music. West Side Story also directed by Robert Wise.
Right.
It's these kind of, and they were all
Oliver, which we just talked about, My Fair Lady, Mary Poppins, Bye Bye Birdie, like.
And I am a fan of the Rodgers and Hammerstein sound.
Right.
I don't love every Rodgers and Hammerstein production, but I that lush, and also again, Oklahoma was groundbreaking for its time. It broke the mold of the previous, musicals. So what's interesting about this film for me, and in revisiting it, is it may just because, maybe because, Nazis are on our horizon again, that I was like, oh yeah. I'm waiting for different things now in the film. I'm waiting for Christopher Plummer tearing up the Nazi flag. I'm waiting for the gifts. And it's just been a long time since I had revisited this film. So I actually found it very delightful. It's long. There's and it's just so weird because you're like, oh my God, they're doing the entire overture. They're doing the intermission. They would have an intermission in this movie. The movie would stop. People would go leave the movie theater, get more popcorn and more snacks, and come back in for the second half of the movie.
See, Martin Scorsese, you can do it, and people are okay with it. Well, and that's the thing. Like again, like having seen a fair amount of Indian cinema, like going to a theater in the last year and seeing an Indian movie, they had the spot for the intermission, but they didn't give us time to leave. They just fucking blew through it. And like, I know with this they were, and I know in India, when they screen Indian cinema, they give them time because I don't know if you guys know this, but you can make more money if you let people go and mill in the fucking lobby for 10 minutes. Like there's a more than 0% chance that I'm going to buy another thing if you let me go out there, as opposed to keeping me hostage in here. But I do like this, because when I watched it on Hulu, they have the intermission, and I enjoyed that because I did pause it there and take a step back.
Bathroom break.
Yeah, because again, it is a long movie and it does need it. And I think, frankly, the narrative that I think that I was thinking coming into this that I was going to say the narrative for me is the weakest part of the movie because it kind of drags and then it just keeps kind of going. And then you think it's over and it's not. It's not. There's a moment where I was like, okay, this movie's got to be over. And there's another half an hour. And I was like, oh, hey, wow, the story just keeps going because it leaves these little bits dangling with Rolf, the kind of the boyfriend, possibly, who then becomes a Hitler Youth, of course. And thoroughly disappointed the way that ends up playing out. But they give it so much time that you think it's going to have this grandiose climax. And then it just kind of farts. It just kind of, and that's the end. And I realized that it feels like the last 20 minutes of the movie could have been excised, and just because, again, I understand what they're going for and I understand what they're getting at and I understand what's going on, but it doesn't need to take this long to get there. And I think that some of the just storytelling beats could have been done a little differently to not make this seem like there's 3 false endings to this movie, because it really feels like there's 3 times this movie can just kind of end.
before they escaped from the Nazis.
But they could have escaped from the Nazis at any point, is my point. Like, they, at one point they go on their honeymoon and like, then they come back and I was like, oh, and this is still going? Like, what is, right now they're the whole singing subplot is a thing. And also we got to conclude the storyline with the boyfriend, the possible boyfriend. But I don't know. Like, I just found the narrative. I mean, again, I know that this is based off of real people's lives. And so again, we have to kind of make sure that we're paying maybe lip service, but at least like paying homage to the idea that these were real people. So it can't get too wild and crazy. But yeah, I honestly, I mean, look, the music is great. So that's really what you're here for. But I found the narrative outside of Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews. I wasn't taken by the narrative anytime they were on screen, which, I mean, again, like it's not that the child actors are bad. I just don't think they're really given a lot to do. I don't think anybody other than Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer are necessarily given a lot to do.
No, because, Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews.
They're great. Like, and I mean, it goes even further. Like, Julie Andrews is so good. Like, I'm not saying Christopher Plummer isn't, but I've seen her in 3 different things with 3 different leading men. And she's fantastic in each one. And I know that those actors have been great in other things that I've seen them in. Christopher Plummer, I've seen him in plenty of stuff. But she is really like a class act, like in a way that's magnetic. Like, yeah, like they don't make them like they used to is not a term I would use with Julie Andrews. They never made anyone else like her anyways, I think is kind of the point.
Yes. So I know you talk about it in the episode, so which I haven't listened to yet, but the Americanization of Emily. Yes, no, where'd you
I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah. Okay,
thoroughly. Because of her, because of how good she is. And she's not even in a lot of ways like the main character. She's the main character of that movie, but she shares a lot of screen time with James Garner. But she's great. Like, she's so good in everything. Like, and again, like, I'm not sitting here surprised by that. I'm more just saying, like, it's shocking how little bad there is in any of this that you could even chalk up to her. Like, I don't think anything that hasn't been unsuccessful is even her fault. I think everything that's been successful is because of how good she is. Like, 100%.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because she almost, like from the research that I did, she almost didn't take the movie.
Right.
Because she had just finished shooting Mary Poppins, but it hadn't come out yet. And then they were nervous about casting her because she hadn't, she'd done movies, but Mary Poppins hadn't come out yet.
Right.
And so it's very interesting to think about the run of these 3 movies, right? I didn't realize they were so close together.
Right.
The Mary Poppins, Sound of Music, and then it was Americanization of Emily was in between. There's something crazy where they're like right next to each other.
So it's Mary Poppins, Americanization of Emily, and then The Sound of Music.
I mean,
I know.
What?
What? I know. It's like
Andrews.
Yeah, it's like when you talk about like Ridley Scott making Alien and Blade Runner back to back. It's like you'd be happy if you directed one of those 2 movies, let alone both back to back. Or like Steven Spielberg making Jaws, and then it's all these things where it's like, yeah, these 3 things alone. But I mean, to have Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music with Americanization of Emily sandwiched in between, like if she never did anything else, she'd be fine. Like just with The Sound of Music alone, and that's the thing. Like Mary Poppins, again, for a certain group of people in a certain age, Mary Poppins is the Julie Andrews role. And then for those people, this might also be in the same conversation as like, that's also the Julie Andrews role. And I think that they both, I mean, again, having seen it now, like I understand why. I understand why this role for Julie Andrews for some people might be the role. Because like, she's amazing.
I think more than Mary Poppins, this role solidified the sweet prequel Julie Andrews, right? Like that she fought against the rest of her career in some ways.
Understandably so. Like,
because this is, I mean, at least with Mary Poppins, there's an edge to Mary Poppins that you kind of forget about, that she's like a little bit scary and, and that, you're like, you kind of, like just aren't sure, right?
Right. Well, there's a moment where she could just be like, I'm going to fuck these kids up. Like, I have magic. Why aren't I fucking them up? Like, why I can make them do what I want, and I'm giving them the opportunity to do it themselves. Like, yeah, there's a benevolence to that that's never really leaned on.
Yeah, but this role is so sweet and so like I was like, oh, this is Anne of Green Gables. Like she's Anne Shirley. Like
Right.
I don't know if you know the Anne of Green Gables novels or shows or movies or musicals, but there's just an adorableness to the role.
Yeah. She's very saccharine. Like she will give you cavities. Like this is like it's really like she's like a ray of, like they say it in the damn song. She's a moonbeam that you can't hold on to. And it's like, you're damn right she is. Like probably is. Like not like Manic Pixie Dream Girl, but like whatever that would have been for people in the 60s. Like this is the idealized woman for a certain man. And like she can change him. Like, and she does. But he also has autonomy of his own. He wanted to change for her. Like, oh, make me swoon, right? Like that's Julie Andrews. That's Julie Andrews.
Now don't start dissing Romance and Love.
I'm not, but I'm like, that's like her character is portrayed that way so strongly that like you believe it. Like it makes sense. Like, but she is kind of like, it's a lot. Like, and I understand why she bristled at that being the thing forever. Like, I wouldn't want to be pigeonholed as that person either for the rest of my career.
Because as far as I understand, that was not her. That she was really, really, like amazing and wonderful, incredibly professional, and super talented and very kind, but I wouldn't have said that she was, Maria von Trapp.
Right. Right.
She is a tougher and way more, savvy. Like her career is really quite stunning, and she was quite, I don't know. I every time you look at something she's done, it's very impressive, and it's very interesting that she. Like Edwards were married, and I'm always really fascinated by her career. And, she reminds me sort of like Emma Thompson. Like there's because there's there's a wild level of intelligence there, and talent, but like just some level of working at a different level than anybody else.
Right. Well, and I would agree. Like, if you look at what she's done since 2001, it's been a couple live action Disney movies, Princess Diaries 1 and 2, but then almost exclusively, for the most part, she's done voice work for Shrek, which I think, again, like at a certain time and place, I would have said Shrek 2 is what I remember her from. And she's great. I saw Shrek 2 recently. She's great. Like her and John Cleese are fantastic in those roles. And like, she brings a gravitas to the role that only she could bring with her voice. Like her voice, I don't know, like in a lot of ways, like her and Angela Lansbury are the like British grandmothers that we all wish we had. And like for a certain group of
Julie Andrews.
Yes. Yeah. But then she also has done work on Despicable Me. So she's getting like, Minion money as well. So yeah, I would agree with you. Like, I think she's a very savvy human being outside of being just immensely talented is probably an understatement. Again, that's the thing. Like when you talk about someone like this who has so many iconic roles to their name, it's not about which one is your favorite. It's like pick which one. And people have a hard time because there are so many that make that.
It depends on the day, right?
Yeah. Well, and it depends on who, like your age and who you are. Yeah. Because that's the other thing. I mean, again, like you mentioned, this and Mary Poppins come out so close to one another that like these two things are vying for the attention of a certain group of people for their love of Julie Andrews. It's like this and Mary Poppins are not it, but like these are the big two, and she made them effectively back to back, which is nuts,
which is insane. And then I was at Disney when Princess Diaries was done, and I worked on the Princess Diaries. I briefly met Julie Andrews. But just within a crowd of people, like, but you're just like Julie Andrews.
Right. I that's the thing. It's like they don't make actors like this anymore.
No. And just really not fazed by her own self, which is weird.
Right.
You're like, shouldn't you be like, I'm fucking Julie Andrews, excuse me. But
I mean, at some point she probably like made peace with that. Like, I wonder when in your career you have to make peace with it, given how big of a deal The Sound of Music is. Like, again, like she's internationally known by 60, 64, 65. Like, again, like Mary Poppins, sure. But like this ends up being like one of the biggest movies of all time. And for the longest time, it was like the biggest movie of all time financially. And I,
Oscars, 5 Oscars.
yeah,
You know,
I mean, Library of Congress, National Film Registry, like AFI, all of those things.
Did you read the thing that basically this was one of the films that was basically selected to air in rotation should there be a nuclear war?
Right.
And they needed to just set something to play?
Well, and that's the thing. Like we were talking, Mike White and Will Dodson and I were talking about A Matter of Life and Death, and the term film blanc came up, which is, again, like if film noir is like the dark side of the human psyche, like film blanc is like meant to be like overwhelmingly positive and like charming and like a ray of light, and like A Matter of Life and Death is that in a lot of ways. And I would say this is like even more so, because again, like you mentioned, you have the topic of the day that everybody can understand, which is the Nazis, because again, this is 65, so only about 20 years removed from the conflict. You have a family in Austria standing up to the Nazis, and showing the Nazis that the spirit of love and music can stand up to the powers of the Third Reich, which is a fun message that I think anybody in 65 can understand. And then you have Julie Andrews, and so you place all of that in a blender together, and you get something that, again, like you mentioned, is such a film blanc in a way that is hard to. Again, they just don't make things like this anymore because it's so genuine in what it is that if anyone made it today, they'd be like, this is disingenuous and full of shit. And it's like, man, we are really cynical. Like, Barbie might be a good example of it's trying to be like overwhelmingly positive, but like even Barbie's pretty cynical of its own message, like intentionally so. Like I find no cynicism in The Sound of Music. Like it's played straight, like which was the intention.
Yes, and I think that again, it sounds like in the stuff that I read that Christopher Plummer was really annoyed by that during production.
Right.
Even then. So I think there were a lot of people that even at the time, clearly Christopher Plummer among them, were like, this is ridiculous. This is way too sweet. This is way too hard on its sleeve. This is way too, black and white, good and bad, Nazis versus love and singing.
Right. What does Plummer say? It's so awful and sentimental and gooey. I think his exact words. I'm sure his tune changed the moment he was like, oh, it's a lot of money though? Okay.
Well, I mean, talk about, again, he had a great career and then this happens, right? Right. And you're like, you sort of never escape that either, right? Like he did amazing stuff, and yet for me, it's always Captain Von Trapp, right? Like it's just always Captain Von Trapp. Every time I'm saying like, oh, look. That
right. Which I think if you like you mentioned doing the research about Christopher Plummer and his like feelings towards this, it sounds like by the end of his life he was like, I'm glad that I was in this movie, but but for your entire life, like he didn't do the 40th anniversary. He called it The Sound of Mucus at one point. But again, like this is such a big deal that I get it. Like I could only, it strikes me similarly to what Daniel Craig said about James Bond before he made the last James Bond movie. He's like, if they ever asked me to do another Bond movie, I think he said I would smash a window and cut my wrists or something. I was like, really? Like, holy shit, man. Like this is not the way you should be reacting to the offer that so many people would consider to be the offer of a lifetime. But at the same time, again, like if you never hear the end of it for the rest of your life about The Sound of Music, I too would probably be sick of it. But
I actually think he came to appreciate it more. I mean, I think a lot of those comments are in the early years, and even though he admitted to them, he's like, oh yeah, I think they talk about the DVD commentary, which I haven't heard, but I want to go find, where he admits that he was drunk during the filming of the Edelweiss song.
Again, he knew they were dubbing him. I mean, he didn't have to.
Now, just recently, I saw on Twitter, and I'm going to go try to find it, that there was a video of of him singing and playing. Like he learned to play the guitar for this, as did Julie Andrews.
Right.
And I don't know that they definitely, I mean, many people were dubbed. Music was usually dubbed, but he sang it, and there's a recording of him singing it that's quite lovely. Like it's really great. You're like, he could have totally sung it. You know, he just wouldn't sound like musical theater, but everything had to sound like that. Like that sound, that perfectness is what we have, and I'm glad for it. That feels that falseness of everything's up here and everybody sounds like Julie Andrews.
They have
in a
to
studio. And so I actually really, that clip was really lovely, and even more lovely than it is in the movie, because it feels more real. It feels more in the moment, even though, again, he doesn't sound as clean or as perfect as Bill, whoever dubbed him.
Bill Lee.
Okay. Yes.
But that's the thing, that's the thing though, with like, then maybe that's why I'm not such a big fan of these kinds of things. It does feel like overly polished. Like there's no, I mean, again, not like I'm saying, like, again, like to go back to something like Les Mis, like, oh, we're going to record the audio on set. Like, it didn't. No, don't do that. Like, don't do that, because that's its own problem. Like, you have to find a happy middle ground. And I'm not saying La La Land is that either, because then you have the question of like people who don't know how to singing. And it's like,
yeah, I'm not a big fan of La La Land, I have to say.
Yeah, well, why are you not a fan of it?
I just found it unaffecting for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, I found, there's a, I wasn't.
Whereas I'm a total, like, and listen, I see your point. It's too long. It's too sweet.
Right. But that's the point. Like I'm complaining about the point of the movie, right?
Holy crap. When you look at the shots, that opening shot, it's famous for a reason.
Right.
It's freaking insane. They pulled that off without a drone.
Right.
You know, that was a guy in a helicopter.
I know.
That was them flying too close to Julie Andrews.
Right.
And the timing of how they did that, insane. Just insane. Like,
well, and that's the thing. I mean, like, again, like it's known for being what it is because these things are so impressive, like that opening shot, like the music, like they have staying power because the people who made it put in that time and effort.
Then, I mean, in the gazebo, I just sort of, you forget certain parts. And then like last night, as I was watching it again, the gazebo scenes, there's first I'm 16 going on 17, and then they come back to the gazebo with the two of them for, arguably for me, one of my favorite songs. That I clearly can't remember the name of, but nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. In my wicked childhood, I must have something good. No, something right. Anyway, so that song is so friggin' beautiful, and that looking through the gazebo into the behind them, it's just gorgeous. And
the shadows and like
shadows. And apparently, and did you read this one? Did you apparently they put him in silhouette because Julie Andrews couldn't stop laughing because the big lights they were using made farting noises, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, I mean, like, such a wholesome story about Julie Andrews, right? Like,
like it's a Community episode.
Right. I love their chemistry, her and Christopher Plummer. Like,
they're so good.
I know they are. I don't, comparatively, I still think I really liked the two of them and Victor Victoria more. Julie Andrews and Robert Preston. I mean, they're just.
Yes.
I mean, they're like the adorable couple, but again, like it's a different energy, different vibe. I will say I think I like her with James Garner in the Americanization of Emily the most. Better
than in Victor Victoria?
No, in more than this. I think Victor, if we're talking like hetero relationships that Julie Andrews is in, I would say her with James Garner in the Americanization of Emily for me is still probably the top. And then this is probably a close second. Her and James Garner and Victor Victoria is not. It's kind
No,
of
it's a goofy.
yeah.
it's
Her and
funny.
Christopher Plummer are great. It's just this is such a weird role for Christopher Plummer for the things I've seen him in that aren't this. That this is like I can see why he was like, ooh, I don't want to do this again. Like this is not beneath me, but like this doesn't challenge me as an actor, which I would like totally get. Like that you have to be so genuine. It's probably like just pain inducing to be this genuine with no pretext all the time. Like there's no subtext to any of this. He's just a nice guy who hates the Nazis. Like, okay, that's
except
not much on the page for that, you know?
Well, and again, what's interesting is he's not the star of the movie.
No.
Which is always hard for many men.
Yeah. White men of a certain age at a certain time and place. Yeah.
He had to just stand there and be the sidekick.
Yeah, look
even
pretty.
though he was going to fight the Nazis by running away, as you do when you
As you do. I mean, that's what you do.
Fighting for the Nazis, it's better to run away.
Yeah.
But I think that element of his annoyance is actually, obviously works for the movie because he's a closed off, heartbroken man who's can't connect with his children and his thing. Apparently, the real Captain Von Trapp was just boring, but very, very nice.
I mean, again, like that, I would go as far as to say his characterization in the movie is kind of boring but nice. Like I like his character is just. I like those moments where it's clearly Christopher Plummer injecting the charisma that he has, where he's being sly and dickish to the Nazis. Like I like that, and where he's kind of being flippant with people. But for the most part, like the first half of the movie, he's very like stodgy and up his own ass, which is the point. I mean, that's the point of the character. But when he starts to warm up to everybody, I really like where that goes with the character. And when he really starts warming up to Julie Andrews, his character starts to kind of thaw a little bit and becomes a lot more interesting. But yeah, I mean, he's amazing. She's amazing. I mean, the movie.
I'm such a sucker. I'm such a sucker for romance. Almost anybody's romance, but clearly a sucker for heterosexual romance. But the dancing, their dancing scene together. I mean, come on.
Look at the way she looks at him. The Baroness is so just like, but I, you know what? Actually, my favorite thing about this movie is how nonplussed the Baroness is. She's like, well, you're clearly more into her than you are me. Okay, I'll go home then. Like, I was shocked. Yeah. Like it felt like it was hewing so close to reality that they almost, it's like, just don't include this character because she does effectively nothing in the, like she adds nothing to the movie and is not even an antagonist. Like she just goes, I mean, I guess she's kind of an antagonist, but not.
She is.
Yeah,
but enough.
Yeah, but like again, not the way I was expecting. She's like, oh, but that's the thing. Like she says, like, oh, he's in love with you to Julie Andrews, and Julie Andrews leaves of her own volition. The Baroness doesn't tell her that and then say like, you should leave. She's just like, he's in love with you, don't you know? And she's like, I must leave now to not interrupt your marriage. It's like everybody is.
Says, I'll help you pack.
Like, yeah, everybody's too nice. Yeah. But like, it's funny because again, like you would expect like in another kind of musical or in another narrative, like that Baroness character would be written differently. And she's written pretty
mildly.
Yeah. For a character like that, who again, just goes, all right, I guess I'm not going to be with you anymore. I'm still rich. I'm just going to go home. Like,
yeah. Well, listen, I'm not going to waste this if you're
right.
Not,
she's still rich, right? Like she's not marrying him
rich,
for the money.
Beautiful,
so
she's it seemed like a good idea, but there's all those children.
Fuck this guy with his 7 kids. Yeah.
Apparently there were 10 in real life.
Yeah. God.
10 children. No wonder his previous wife died.
Well, I mean, what do you do in in this time and place? You have a lot of kids so that they can help around this giant house, this giant, beautiful house. I mean, that's the thing. We kind of talked about it a little bit. The production design in this movie is
it's just off the hook.
I know.
I mean, just everything looks so incredible, and that it would take about 3 days to walk between everything. But apparently, Julie Andrews can do it in 20 minutes.
Right. Yeah, it feels very real, and like again, like that's another benefit of the time and place that this movie's being made. Like the only way to do it is to do it for real. So we have to make sure that it looks real and it looks real because it's a real place. Like this is being shot on not on location as it were, like exactly where all this happened, but it's being shot. Yeah, like it's being shot in Eastern, in Europe where a lot of this took place. So yeah, like the reason it looks real is because they're really there for the most part.
Yeah, they're in Salzburg. It sounds like, and they're really, and I guess they were actually concerned during the filming because they were like, with the mayor, they were like, so we're going to hang some Nazi flags.
Right.
It's been 22 years.
Right.
Want to make sure everybody's cool. That's like when you're in New York and you see the filming and they're like, there might be gunfire. You get visual notices if you're walking around and then there's
right.
At least you used to. I don't even know if they allow it anymore because it's too soon every time.
Every day. Every week is too soon.
Yeah. But I remember walking around New York and being like, oh, God, they're just going to, tell you they're about to do some gunfire. Law and order must be around the corner.
Right, right.
So, but yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And there's you can go and visit all the Sound of Music. There's like a whole, world that's still visiting the Sound of Music locations and Salzburg, which is kind of lovely. Again, I'm all for things that are nice and friendly and anti-Nazi.
Right.
So
well, and I mean, again, like you mentioned, shooting it on location in Salzburg. I mean, that adds to, you can't fake it. It just adds to the richness of the movie. Like it just adds to the feeling of richness that the movie has. That there's this like glow to the movie that it has that again you can't fake with any amount of CGI. No matter how hard you try, all you can do is try to replicate what these movies were doing for real, which is set on location in a real place, as ornately done up as these places are in this movie. And yeah, I mean, again, the movie lingers on it during stuff like the overture. We're given a moment to kind of see the world and live in it and breathe in it. But I mean, again, all these scenes of people dancing in these ornate rooms. And then, like you mentioned, a lot of the scenes at the gazebo, like these are really over the top places. Like you get to be part of this world of like the upper crust of people right at a certain time and place that, again, like it for a certain group of people, that will always be a world worth revisiting. And I mean, again, to your point of like going and visiting it in the real world, like you said, those places are still there for the most part. A lot of it wasn't destroyed, thankfully. But yeah, like I will say, because we keep bringing up the thing about the Nazis, and I made the joke last time we were together about this movie being pro-Nazi. Obviously, it's not pro-Nazi, but I think it's a different problem, and you've kind of already alluded to it, which is like they were the Nazis. Like I get it. And I get that, again, the real person didn't go work with them just like he does it in the movie, but it's all a little toned down is what I would get. They toned down the Nazis, which like that ain't great, but I get why they did it. But like,
what way do they tone down the Nazis?
They're very,
they don't do Nazi stuff yet.
They're nice Nazis. Like they're not mean Nazis, but I'm just saying like, they're not teeth gnashing, foaming mouth Nazis. You know what I mean? Like they're the bureaucratic Nazis, which is a different problem. Like the scarier thing is killing people with typewriters. I get it. But like, again, like they can't do the Nazis the way we've seen them because that is a too brutal of a reality for Maria von Trapp to deal with her singing. She, you know what I mean? Like she'd pull out a gun and start shooting the Nazis is my point.
I'm going to say that that's more true to the story. This was about basically the point of when Nazis, I mean, I was just in Amsterdam,
right?
And where every tour you take, thankfully, talks about the Nazis,
right? And
talks about that basically Amsterdam, like the Netherlands, who had stayed out of World War I, thought they could stay out of World War II. And so but then the Nazis basically were like, oh, we're going to bomb the crap out of this one city. And then you're either going to, or you can give up and then we'll bomb the rest. You can fight us or you can give up. And they gave up and they said, we'll be kind. We're peaceful. So you'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Right.
And then they slaughtered all the Jewish people.
Right. I mean, yeah.
And then everybody died. But the first step was we're going to try to comply.
Right.
Right. The first step is not.
I know. I get it.
Shoot you in the city.
Right.
The Von Trapp family didn't escape over the Alps. They got on a train and left
Right.
the day before the Nazis shut down the borders. So that like they weren't they're Nazis, but they're not Nazis walking in the door to shoot you. They're Nazis knocking at the door saying, "We're coming in."
Right. Right.
And they're kind of hoping that people will just comply, right? And many people do because it seems safer.
It's the optics of it. I mean, again, like I agree. I mean, like, again, like it's based off of a real story too. Like, and again, like they can't get out of the reality of it. And I don't want them to. I want this to hew close to reality. I don't want this to be some thing. But again, like I haven't seen a modern readaptation of this. And so how is it handled in something more modernly?
That's interesting. I didn't see the live. They just did, the most recent version
on TV.
The live TV version. I didn't see that. So I don't know. And I haven't seen a production of this in a long time. So I don't know if there's an adjustment. But I think, again, for me, it's actually the most realistic part of the movie. Sure. I actually think, as we've learned, that when Nazis show up, it's not just walking in shooting people.
Right.
It's basically talking in rhetoric that it at first sounds like, oh, you're just against, you just have some issues with immigration, and then in later is suddenly you're 10 steps down the line in your rhetoric.
Right.
Suddenly they're in the door and you're like, I have to negotiate with you. Suddenly you're like, I thought we were on a reasonable behavior plan, and then it's not. So I actually think I find that part of the movie actually more realistic, that there are, people who are just inclined to join that party.
Right.
There are times when it feels like, well, you just like Max says, well, you can't just go against it. You just have to basically be clever and work your way around the Nazis. I think that's way more accurate to how people think things will happen. I think it's not clear when the Nazis are at your door.
Right.
And that basically defying them is the right thing to do, and that they're going to walk in, and not all Nazis walk in shooting.
Right.
Many of them walk in shaking your hand. So I think we've, if we had, and being, snotty at parties,
don't you believe the way we do things is right? I love how big of a dick Christopher Plummer is to the Nazis in this movie. Like that, that for me was probably my favorite part, is just him, like just being, I mean, again, those moments where you finally get to see that character bristle at what's going on and tell them essentially to go fuck themselves. But again, like you said, I mean, the reality is what the reality is. And the reality was that so many people just let it happen, which is how these things happen. And the reality of the movie is that it's trying to show what was going on at the time within reason.
Within reason. The character of Rolf, I think, is the interesting one. It's such a strange conclusion to his storyline, where he's still just a Nazi at the end of the movie. Well, yeah, Christopher Plummer tried that. I actually had forgotten. I had forgotten that part a little bit, like how long that scene goes on.
And goes on for a while.
Christopher Plummer really well. I actually, again, I think it's giving you some nice third act tension, and but I also think that moment is you really are kind of hoping that Rolf won't turn out to be a Nazi,
right?
But he goes full Nazi.
Well, see, that's the thing. Like where the story ends up, like Christopher Plummer is not able to convert him to not be a Nazi, but he gets through to him enough where he doesn't shoot him.
Yeah. Well, because he is a captain.
Right.
And I actually, again, I totally bought that moment, because he's a captain and he is the father that he's been deferring to most of the time. So even though the kid thinks he's wrong, it particularly at that time, there was a lot of just,
right.
You had to give respect to your elders. That was much more the time than now. Now it's, screw it.
Right.
They don't know anything more than we do. They're idiots, which is, mostly true. But I think, I mean, I guess it's a little bit like movie.
Right. It feels a little movie-y.
It feels
like,
a little movie.
yeah. But again, like that's okay. Like again, like I just, for me, the third act of the movie just kind of, once I realized where it was going and like, okay, so they're going to have to hit at least one or two of these songs one more time. Like Edelweiss and So Long
Mom,
Farewell.
But that is so
I know. Like, again, I mean, again, like I'm not making casting aspersions either way. It's like, I realize that like, okay, there's still 30 minutes left. They still need to get through these two more songs one more time. And that's the other thing about this that, again, obviously musicals, they have reprisals of songs and they come back at the end. I was kind of surprised that like the same song just comes, like it's the same song twice. 2 times even with So Long Farewell and Edelweiss. And like, I was just surprised that they just did them again. Because normally it's like, it's in something else or it's part of the finale. And I was like, no, they're just doing the whole song again. Like I was kind of surprised.
I think that is a more old fashioned.
Yes.
I think that is
that feels very old fashioned.
I mean, again, particularly for Edelweiss, I totally will have it because I'm like, yeah. And
it's
then,
a great song.
And then the Cuckoo song is, again, I think you're counting on, there's something more delicious watching it once you know what's happening.
Right.
So you're like, okay, who are they getting out first? They're sending the kids out. And then, like, it's like, oh, they're about to make a break for it. So I think there's a tension in that song that exists story-wise if you know what's happening.
Right.
Like on the second viewing, it's a little more interesting because you know what they're doing.
Right.
And so, but at the same time, I think that's just more, I think it is of the time.
Yeah. Well, like Climb Every Mountain too, like same thing. Like, and again, like, is what it is.
Songs.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, and I mean, Jesus, they even do 16 going on 17, don't they? Like but that's more the traditional, like the more traditional of now, where like just comes back for a moment. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, as much as I did enjoy the musical numbers in the movie, like I was like, man, I kind of just
got it.
Yeah. Like I don't know if I need to hear it again. But I will say, my feelings on the movie aside, I'm glad I watched it. I'm glad I finally have seen it. I don't know if I would rewatch this again, but I would be curious to see which of the Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals I do resonate with, because the ones that I've seen so far, so this and they did Cinderella as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, they are not my thing. They're not the thing that I like in terms of musicals. And then I think we did on Rankin and Bass, Richard and Mike and I covered a animated version of The King and I, which is not great, and included racist characters. But that's not good for a different reason. Like I can't speak to the play at all. A lot of
The King and I is got a lot of issues race-wise. The original, the musical.
Daryl Hammond doing a Mickey Rooney chop socky thing, though.
That's worse.
Yeah, that's an unneeded addition that adds nothing and frankly detracts completely.
Well, I mean, and again, here the other ones that for me are worth seeing are South Pacific and Oklahoma in terms of the movie versions. And King and I, the performances are just so friggin' beautiful. But it's really like King and I and South Pacific both have real issues of race going on, and yet there also were groundbreaking.
Right.
And South Pacific couldn't be shown in certain theaters in America because it felt so horrific because they were they were trying to speak to racism, which I think is always, certainly a challenge at the time that movie came out. But the idea that you were trying to speak to it meant that you were trying to do something. The fact that it doesn't necessarily all hold up and still ended up having some elements that people find offensive now is one of the challenges of being in a racist society, and having institutional racism. So even when you try to address it, even when you're trying to do so, it doesn't always work out. But Oklahoma is very interesting because Oklahoma, I love the stage musical of Oklahoma. It's, I saw the new version, which was super interesting in so many ways, and I love so many parts of it. but I actually think they didn't earn the right to do what they did with the ending of the new version of the musical, I think, which was basically punch you in the face with horror. But the movie is, again, probably Sound of Music may actually hold up as a movie better than almost any of the other movie musicals of Rodgers and Hammerstein, only because it's so sincere to begin with, right? And King and I and South Pacific are both actually trying to do something, but it makes them more complicated to now revisit because often it's not done well.
Right. They tried, but trying sometimes is the problem.
Well, again, it's not the problem to try, but it is accurate to say that it's not completely successful, even though it is successful in so many ways and was a step, possibly a needed step, to then actually have real representation, and then Oklahoma is just like, I think that music is freaking beautiful. I love the big lush version of it. I love the more stripped down versions of that music. I think the story in Oklahoma, because it's based on a play, is just more interesting. The characters and the setting, but it also is it's a big old fashioned musical. And stuff. So yeah, but I think of the ones you haven't seen, Oklahoma, South Pacific, and King and I would be on my list. That are, if you want to sort of complete a movie musical, like know where things are coming from. Those are all significant movie musicals that are spoofed, are in the blood of our pop culture.
Right. Which The Sound of Music is, like,
The Sound of Music is
more so than any of the other ones, right? Like, it is. If you want to talk about the one that's transcended the medium, it's The Sound of Music, right? Like beyond. So, Susan, final thoughts on The Sound of Music?
I loved watching it again, but I would it's been some time. If you've just watched it, unless you love it, you don't necessarily have to rewatch it immediately. But it was so beautiful. It was just so beautiful. But it is long. Yeah.
I appreciate that you wanted to watch this, and you can, again, like, not that I wouldn't have watched it, but like you were also like, let's watch it. And I was like, okay, cool. Like you feel certainly motivated about it, and like you find it to be something worth watching. And I would agree. I mean, I think this is definitely a movie worth seeing at least once. If you resonate with it, great. If not, great. It doesn't matter if you don't resonate with it for the most part, because it is such an important movie outside of just it being a movie, that there's so much else to talk about, that feelings towards your subjective feelings on the movie, like mine aside, it's a movie worth watching at least once. I think it's a movie worth enjoying the music and kind of just the grandiosity of it and the story that it's telling. I think, you may or may not resonate with that, but the people in the story and the actors and the music and the cinematography and the production design are so lush and I think well done, and done in a way that really isn't done anymore, that if anything, you can at least watch the movie and appreciate it for how well made it is. Which, I mean, again, to enjoy something for the technical value, I understand maybe for some people isn't something they want to do or even like doing, but I would contend with this, it's just as valuable a technical masterpiece as it is a pop culture touchstone, as it is part of, Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer's body of work. So no, again, my personal feelings aside, this is an important movie and an important musical, and one that, again, I'm glad I've seen it now. I understand. I can put more of the things I've seen now in better context. And I mean, even again, seeing a movie one time can help you do that. I mean, or, for however many times I watched it for this 2 or 3 times, but beside the point. So, Susan, when you and I aren't talking about Julie Andrews stuff, where can people find you and the things that you work on?
Well, they can find myself and my co-host Sharon Johnson at 80stvladies.com, and on all the social medias at 80stvladies. And you can also find me on Twitter at twitter.com/Susan Lambert for now. And I'm, and at SusanLambertHaddam.com. And I just want to note real quick that there's actually a funny, weird spoof of The Sound of Music musical that was done in 1962. That was a send-up called The Pratt Family Singers. It was a send-up of the stage musical. It was done before the movie. And it's Carol Burnett and Julie Andrews, who had not done the stage musical. And so it's really funny because she's basically playing Maria von Trapp, but it's all done for comic effect. And they're doing a spoof of the stage musical in this Carol Burnett bit. And it's very weird. Because you're like, wait, worlds colliding. Anyway.
Aren't you going to do the thing? Aren't you going to do the thing at some point? Like, you're going to do this at some point for real, huh? Like, that's fun.
No idea that was what was going to happen next. Anyway, that's wild. Anyway, but that's where you can find me, SusanLambertHaddam.com.
And you can find me at weirdingwaymedia.com, where this show and so many other shows can be found. Like Susan mentioned, 80s TV Ladies, Feminine Critique, Twisted and Uncorked, all great shows that you can find at weirdingwaymedia.com. As for this show, patreon.com/culturecast, culturecast.com, places you can go to support the show financially. $10 gets you in on Rankin' on Bond, where we're talking about James Bond movies once a month. And that's Mike White and Richard and I. So, and you'll be on there at some point soon, Susan. I think coming up in the next couple months, we're going to be doing On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is a different Bond movie. Bond movie of a different color.
I'm so excited. I can't wait. And I'm so excited to listen to them, which I will. The Rankin' on Bond, I think, is such a great idea.
Me too. I mean, any opportunity to talk about James Bond, especially with Richard and Mike. So I'll never say no. So,
yes.
Well, and I was to say, likewise to yourself, Susan, thank you so much for bringing Sound of Music to the show and wanting to talk about it. This was fun. I look forward to the next time we get to talk. So
thank you so much for having me on, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah. And we'll talk to you on the next episode.